Truth like a diamond. Chapter 3:1. Chapter 3. Why can we not be justified by the works of the law? 1. A progressively new perspective on justification. Justification is the same. There is an aspect of justification in which it has already happened, and there is another aspect in which justification has yet to happen. Justification does not end with being the first step of salvation. Glorification, the completion of salvation, is also justification, namely the ultimate justification yet to be achieved. Furthermore, we must also realize that the middle step, which is sanctification, is also a part of this justification. Dr. Kim explained this through the concept that righteousness is not only a forensic notion but also a relational one. When we believe in Jesus and are deemed righteous, it does not end with simply being deemed. We also receive the obligation of living righteously. Hence, it is inevitable that living righteously, namely sanctification, is also a part of justification, and can be viewed as its present counterpart. Like Luther, many consider the latter half of Romans 3 until Romans 5 to be dealing with the doctrine of justification as they preach their expositions on Romans. They believe that Romans 6 through the first half of chapter 8 deals with sanctification, and the latter half of chapter 8 with glorification. They agree with Luther's quote that Romans is a perfect outline of the New Testament or possibly the Gospel. But in actuality, chapter 6, and even 7 and 8, deals with justification. This means that Romans 3 all the way through 8 is an explanation of justification. To be more accurate, the entirety of Romans 1 through 8 is dealing with justification. I fell into admiration as I read this explanation that the entire soteriology could be described by this doctrine of justification. I could not help but question why I could not think of such an explanation before. Can you understand why this is important? Many think that Romans 3 through 5 is talking about justification, and they believe just that portion to be the gospel. They do not consider chapter 6 to be the gospel, as it is dealing with sanctification. From a systematic theological point of view, regeneration, sanctification, glorification are indeed acknowledged as soteriology, but when preaching or explaining the gospel, it is often that only justification is mentioned. It is taught and preached that as long as people have faith, regardless of sanctification, they would all go to heaven. Portraying the gospel as such is lethal for those souls, for it causes morality to disappear and raises the likelihood that those souls will not be able to enter heaven. I think it is important to elaborate on the relationship between justification and regeneration at this point before moving on. One of the pastors at our church had recently asked me this question as we were discussing soteriology. Pastor, then how are regeneration and justification different? What is the difference between the two? If salvation were a coin, I had believed in the past that justification would be one face and regeneration the other. I thought that the two were always together and simultaneous. Of course, such a notion is not completely wrong. But it is not an accurate explanation either. Justification and regeneration are the two most representative factors that are related to the two required themes of salvation, the forgiveness of sin and the freedom from sin. However, the two are not on equal grounds. Rather, regeneration is a part of justification. As written in Romans 6, justification includes the forgiveness of sin based on Jesus' death and the transformation by the power of God based on his resurrection. The latter is regeneration. Compare these two passages. Rom. 6-3, 11 and Ephesians 2:1, 5. Thus, the two are not completely separate, but regeneration is rather included in justification. To go a step further, justification includes sanctification and glorification as well. Regeneration is a part of soteriology, and justification is the entirety of it. The soteriology of Christianity is not regeneration but justification. It is when we explain salvation through this justification that we can most perfectly describe soteriology through the processes of sanctification and glorification. When I realized this, a question I had harbored for quite some time was immediately solved. I had wondered why the Bible had so few mentions of regeneration relative to justification. I questioned why there were significantly more words written on justification when it is not the forgiveness of sin but being free from it that is ultimately salvation and more important. If I were to have written on salvation, I would have put more emphasis on regeneration. Yet, Paul unilaterally emphasizes justification. He mentions regeneration only occasionally, and focuses most of his words on justification. It didn't make any sense. However, I realized that this was nothing strange, and rather a matter of course. The most representative truth that encompasses salvation in the Bible is not rebirth but justification. Furthermore, the justification that Paul was teaching is different from the currently popular form of fideism. The justification taught by Paul includes the essence of regeneration within it, hence there was no real need to write more on the subject. In the past, when I had understood salvation under the order of salvation, I presented my soteriology very effectively using the following three verses: Ephesians 2:8, Philippians 2:12, and 2 Timothy 4:18. The fact that salvation can be explained by justification can also be shown effectively by these three verses, which I will share with you now. 1. The gift of righteousness. For if by the transgression of the one, death reigned through the one, much more those who receive the abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ. Romans 5:17. The gift of righteousness refers to being forensically deemed righteous when we receive Jesus Christ. It is the past aspect of justification that has already been received. A gift is something that is received without payment. In that sense, the word gift is a very appropriate expression of the justification that deems us righteous free of cost. 2. The fruit of righteousness. Having been filled with the fruit of righteousness which comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Philippians 1:11. Righteousness does not end with us simply receiving the gift of righteousness. Righteousness is not only forensic but also relational. We must therefore use that moment to start living a life that bears the fruit of righteousness. The fruit of righteousness is the present aspect of justification. It refers to continuously standing in the midst of the grace of the justification already received. Rom. 5-2, 1 Corinthians 10:12. And unlike gifts, fruits are something that we the branches must bear. We must therefore carry this responsibility and make the right decisions. 3. The hope of righteousness. For we through the Spirit, by faith, are waiting for the hope of righteousness. Galatians 5:5. Hope is not a memory, past. It is not reality either, present. Hope is in regards to the future. The hope of righteousness is referring to the future, the ultimate deeming as righteous at the judgment seat of God. It is the completion of being justified. Here are a few quotes from the works of Dr. Yan Gyong Kwan. Paul makes it absolutely clear that the justification to which he is referring is the hope of righteousness, the object of hope. Gal. 5-5. The battleground of Galatians is justification. Strictly speaking, the theme is not the present form of justification, but the hope of righteousness, the justification of the future. Gal. 5-5. The works of the law and faith are waging a battle over this hope of righteousness. By the traditions of Judaism, justification was originally a concept based on the background of the final judgment. Being made righteous or justified signified God acknowledging those who faithfully kept the laws as righteous at the final judgment. Paul explicitly shows that justification is the object of eschatological hope. For we through the Spirit, by faith, are waiting for the hope of righteousness. Gal. 5-5. This is the central verse that summarizes the discussion of justification in Galatians. In this decisive passage, Paul portrays justification as the object of the hope for which we must earnestly wait. Such a statement should not have been made if it were his intention to assert that justification had already been achieved. Yet, Paul boldly discloses that justification is the object of this futuristic hope. Like so, the hope of righteousness is a statement about justification. It is an expression not of the righteousness already achieved, but of the righteousness yet to be achieved, the justification that is to be given at the seat of judgment. We must therefore live with this as our goal as Paul had done. Isn't it much easier to understand justification after reading the explanations of these 3 verses? As the present would not exist without the past, the fruit of righteousness would not exist without the gift of righteousness. And as the future would not exist without the present, the hope of righteousness cannot be achieved without the fruit of righteousness. As stated in Hebrews 12:14, there is the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. The fruit of righteousness is located right in the middle and acts as a bridge. Just as how one cannot cross a river without a bridge, one cannot arrive at the hope of righteousness that is the final salvation without bearing the fruit of righteousness first. Therefore, the most important thing for us believers is not the assurance of salvation but the constant bearing of the fruit of righteousness. Next chapter 3-2. Copyright by Byun-Sung Woo, published by Holy Pearl Publications, Beloved Church in Korea website, www.beloved.com YouTube, www.youtube.com/@gefctv media email, holypearlpub@daum.net telephone, +82 02 586 3079.